The insurance paper wasn't supposed to be in that drawer. I had been looking for a recipe card, my grandmother's cornbread, the one Thomas always loved during our 42 years of marriage. Instead, my fingers touched a thick yellow envelope tucked beneath old tax returns and forgotten birthday cards. I might have overlooked it entirely if it weren't for the date stamp, March 17th of this year, just 3 weeks ago. My name is Helen Clark, and at 64, I'd long since stopped believing in coincidences. For decades of teaching, high school English had sharpened my attention to detail, my ability to see things that didn't fit in stories. And this, an envelope I'd never seen before, hidden in a drawer Thomas knew I rarely opened. This was the beginning of a story I hadn't expected. I slid the papers out, smoothing them against the polished oak of our kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared thousands of meals, raised 2 children, and grown old together. The afternoon light spilled through the bay windows, lighting up the bold text at the top of the document. Life insurance policy. My heart gave a small jump. It wasn't strange to have life insurance. Thomas and I had modest policies on each other, taken out decades ago when the children were small. But this was new, and it wasn't on Thomas. It was on me for $2 million. $2 million that hadn't been there the month before when we met with our financial advisor for our annual review. $2 million that Thomas had never mentioned. I looked at the dates carefully. The policy had been started on March 10th, with the first payment processed on March 15th. I frowned, something pulling at my memory. I reached for my phone, scrolling through my calendar. There it was, March 8th through 14th. My trip to visit our daughter, Lisa, in Portland. I had flown out to help with our newest grandchild, Rose, born 2 weeks early while Lisa's husband was away on business. Thomas had begged off, saying a flare-up of his arthritis made the cross-country flight too painful. I'd been gone exactly 1 week. He'd taken out the policy while I was on the other side of the country. The kettle whistled, startling me. I folded the papers with trembling hands, returning them exactly as I'd found them. As I prepared my afternoon tea, I tried to make sense of what I discovered. Perhaps it was innocent, extra protection as we aged, a surprise he planned to tell me about. But why hide it? Why not mention it during our regular Sunday talks about money? And why so much? Our home was long paid off. Our children were settled in their careers. We lived comfortably on our pensions and investments, but we had never been wealthy. $2 million was an extraordinary sum. As I sipped my tea, a memory surfaced, a conversation from last month when I'd returned from my book club. "You seem distracted," I'd said, noticing how Thomas barely looked up from his laptop when I entered the room. Oh, just doing some research." "On what?" He'd closed the screen quickly. "Nothing important. How was the book?" I hadn't thought much of it then. After 42 years, you learn to give each other space. Now, I wondered what he'd been researching so intently. I was still thinking about this when I heard the garage door open. Thomas was home from his golf game earlier than expected. I took a deep breath, deciding to watch rather than confront. If my suspicions were wrong, I'd be relieved. If not, well, I'd need more than an unexplained insurance policy before jumping to conclusions. "Helen." Thomas's voice carried from the entryway, followed by the familiar thud of his golf bag against the wall. "You home?" In the kitchen, I called back, making my face look normal. He appeared in the doorway, tall and still handsome at 67, with silver hair and the same blue eyes I'd fallen for at university. He smiled, the same smile that had once made my heart race, but now sent a chill down my spine. "You're home early?" I said. "Game ended sooner than expected. Ted wasn't feeling well." He crossed to the refrigerator, getting a bottle of water. "What have you been up to?" The lie came easily. "Just organizing some recipes. Thought I'd make your favorite cornbread for dinner." Thomas's smile widened. "That sounds wonderful. You know how I love your cornbread." I searched his face for any sign, any hint that might betray a hidden motive. There was nothing, just the familiar expression of a man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world. That night, as Thomas slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Perhaps I was being paranoid. People took out life insurance policies all the time. But the timing, the secrecy, the amount, it all felt wrong. I needed more information, and I knew just where to start. Tomorrow, while Thomas was at his weekly physical therapy appointment, I would begin my investigation in earnest. Little did I know that what I would discover over the coming days would change everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and the man who had shared my bed for more than 4 decades. The next morning dawned with the kind of perfect clarity that only spring in Vermont can offer. Sunlight filtered through our bedroom curtains, casting soft shadows across the walls. Thomas was already up. I could hear him in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of coffee brewing and the news playing softly on the radio. I remained in bed a moment longer, gathering my thoughts. Today was Thursday, Thomas's standing appointment with Dr. White for his shoulder therapy. 2 hours where I could search without being interrupted. When I finally made my way downstairs, Thomas was seated at the kitchen island, a newspaper spread before him, a mug of coffee steaming at his elbow. He glanced up with a smile that seemed entirely too normal for a man possibly planning his wife's death. "Morning, sunshine," he said. "Coffee's fresh." I returned a smile, careful to maintain our routine. "Thanks. Any plans today besides therapy?" "Might stop by the hardware store after. Thinking of fixing that loose railing on the back deck this weekend." He took a sip of his coffee. "You have a book club committee meeting at noon?" "We're finalizing next month's selection." Another easy lie. Book club wasn't until next week. Thomas nodded, returning to his newspaper. I poured myself coffee, the normality of the moment almost making me doubt what I'd found yesterday. Almost. After Thomas left for his appointment, I waited 15 minutes to ensure he wouldn't return for something forgotten, then began my search in earnest. I started with his office, the small converted den where he kept his important papers and personal computer. His laptop was password protected, of course, but after 4 decades of marriage, there were few secrets between us. Or so I thought. I typed in the standard password he used for everything. Helen Day, 1979, the day we met. The screen remained locked. I tried our anniversary, his birthday, the children's birthdays. Nothing worked. That in itself was a sign. Thomas had changed his password to something I would not know. I moved on to his desk drawers, carefully going through each one. Most contained what you'd expect: office supplies, old technology manuals, and used greeting cards. But in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of warranties for appliances we no longer owned, I found another envelope. This one contained bank statements for an account I'd never seen before at a bank we didn't use. According to the statement, the account had been opened in January, just 3 months ago, with an initial deposit of $50,000. My blood ran cold. The money had come from our joint investment account, a withdrawal I remembered Thomas explaining as a transfer to our regular savings for a planned kitchen renovation. But it had never arrived there. Instead, it had gone to this secret account, which now held just under $47,000. Where had the missing $3,000 gone? I continued searching until I found a third envelope. This one contained receipts. One for a consultation with an attorney I didn't recognize, another for a private investigator, the name Blackwell Investigations on the receipt in discreet gray lettering, and several more from a high-end jewelry store in Boston, totaling just over $3,000. I'd received no jewelry from Thomas in recent months. The picture forming was both clear and devastating. My husband of 42 years was having an affair and considering a permanent solution to his marital obligations. I sat in his office chair, documents spread before me, feeling oddly calm. The emotional breakdown would come later. I was certain. For now, analytical teacher mode had taken over. I needed more information. I needed proof beyond hints. And most importantly, I needed to protect myself. I carefully returned everything to its proper place, leaving no trace of my investigation. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first to our family attorney, not the one Thomas had consulted. The second to our financial advisor. And the third to my oldest friend, Susan, who had stood beside me through every crisis since college. By the time Thomas returned from physical therapy, I had composed myself and made a plan. I would watch, wait, and gather evidence. I would secure my own financial resources and legal protection, and I would find out exactly what or who had driven my husband to such desperate measures after more than 4 decades of what I believed was a happy marriage. How was therapy? I asked as he entered the kitchen, my voice remarkably steady. Same as always, painful, but necessary. He rolled his shoulder in a showy way. Weiss thinks another month, and I might be back to normal. I nodded sympathetically, wondering if anything would ever be normal again. That's good. I made some lunch, if you're hungry. As we ate sandwiches in a comfortable silence, a silence now filled with unspoken suspicions and betrayals, I studied the man across from me. The familiar lines of his face, the hands that had held mine through 2 childbirths, a cancer scare, and the deaths of both my parents. The mouth that had whispered, "I love you," every night for thousands of nights. Who was this person, really, and what was he capable of? The answers, I feared, would destroy the life we had built together. But I had to know. Whatever came next, I had to know. Over the next 2 weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I noted Thomas's comings and goings, his phone habits, his moods. I documented unexplained absences and overheard fragments of quiet phone conversations. I watched our bank accounts with sharp intensity, monitoring every transaction through our online banking. Thomas, meanwhile, seemed to notice nothing was wrong, or if he did, he gave no indication. Our routines continued as they had for decades. We shared meals, watched our favorite programs, discussed our children and grandchildren. He kissed me goodbye each morning and hello each evening. We even made love twice, encounters that left me feeling empty and confused afterward. How could someone fake such intimacy? Or was I the one who had made up an elaborate story based on an insurance policy I didn't understand and bank transfers that might have innocent explanations? But then came the business trip, a 3-day conference in Boston that Thomas had mentioned casually over dinner one night. The American Engineers Association is hosting a panel on structural innovations. Thought I'd attend, reconnect with some old colleagues. He'd been retired from his engineering firm for 4 years, but maintained professional connections. That sounds nice, I'd replied, my mind racing. In 42 years of marriage, Thomas had attended perhaps 5 conferences without me. When is it? Next week, Tuesday through Thursday. The timing was suspicious. My annual checkup with Dr. White was scheduled for that Wednesday, a standing appointment Thomas had entered into our shared calendar months ago. That night, after Thomas was asleep, I slipped out of bed and checked his laptop again. He'd left it on the kitchen counter, and to my surprise, it wasn't locked. Perhaps he'd grown careless, or perhaps he decided I wasn't a threat. His browser history revealed searches for Boston hotels and flights, seemingly confirming his story. But then I noticed something else. Searches for undetectable poisons, natural toxins that mimic heart attacks, and average police investigation time for sudden death. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. I took photos of the screen with my phone, then carefully closed the browser to exactly where it had been. Back in bed, I stared at the ceiling, listening to Thomas's even breathing beside me. The man I had loved for most of my life was researching ways to kill me. The next morning, I called Susan. "I need you to come stay with me next week," I said without a greeting when she answered. "Helen, what's wrong?" Concern came through the phone. "Thomas is going to a conference. I don't want to be alone." I couldn't bring myself to voice my true fears. Not yet. Not without absolute certainty. Susan, bless her, asked no questions. "Of course. I'll be there Tuesday through Thursday. He leaves Tuesday morning. I'll pack a bag. We'll have a proper girls' retreat." The relief was huge. Susan had been a detective's wife for 30 years before Henry's retirement. She would understand the situation better than most, and I trusted her judgment completely. Thomas left for Boston early Tuesday morning, kissing me goodbye at the door, his overnight bag in hand. "I'll call when I land," he promised. I watched from the window as his car disappeared down the street, then immediately called Susan. "He's gone. Can you come over now?" She arrived 30 minutes later, overnight bag in one hand, a box of documents in the other. "Show me everything," she said the moment she entered. I laid it all out, the insurance policy, the bank statements, the receipts, the browser history. Susan examined each piece carefully, her expression growing more serious by the minute. "You need to go to the police," she said finally. I shook my head. With what? Suspicious internet searches? A life insurance policy that could be perfectly legal? They'd laugh me out of the station. "Then we need more evidence," Susan declared. "And you need protection. I'm not leaving your side until we figure this out." That evening, Thomas called as promised, his voice warm and normal over the speakerphone as Susan and I listened. "The hotel is spectacular," he said with enthusiasm. "Right on the river, view of the whole city. You'd love it, Helen. We should come back together sometime." "That sounds wonderful," I replied, catching Susan's eye. She shook her head slightly, her expression troubled. "How was your day?" he asked. "Quiet. Just catching up on some reading." I didn't mention Susan's presence. "How was the conference?" "Fascinating. Reconnected with Bill Harris. Remember him? From the Philadelphia Project. He's doing remarkable work with sustainable materials." The conversation continued for several minutes, all perfectly ordinary. After we hung up, Susan sighed. "He's good. Very good. Or innocent," I suggested half-heartedly. "Let's check," Susan said, pulling out her phone. She dialed a number from memory. "Henry, it's me. Need a favor. Can you call your buddy Steve at Boston PD and ask him to drive by the Riverside Grand Hotel? See if he can confirm whether a Thomas Clark checked in there today." An hour later, her phone rang. She listened, thanked the caller, and hung up with a grim expression. No Thomas Clark registered at the Riverside Grand. In fact, no engineering conference happening there this week. My world tilted sideways. Then where is he? That's what we need to find out. But first, we need to make sure you're safe when he returns. The next day was my doctor's appointment, the one Thomas had suspiciously scheduled his conference around. Dr. White found nothing unusual during my checkup, saying I was in excellent health for a woman of 64. "Keep doing whatever you're doing, Helen," she said cheerfully. "Your blood work from last time was perfect. Heart strong, blood pressure ideal. You'll outlive us all." As Susan and I drove home, a thought occurred to me. "The coffee," I said suddenly. "What coffee?" "Every morning for the past month, Thomas has insisted on making my coffee. Says he's perfected the ratio of beans to water." I gripped the dashboard. "Susan, what if he's been testing something? Something that wouldn't show up in standard blood work?" Susan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "When does he get back?" "Tomorrow afternoon." "Then we'll be ready for him." That night, we made a plan. Susan would leave visibly in the morning, but return through the back entrance, remaining hidden in the house. I would act normally, greeting Thomas when he returned, accepting his customary offer of coffee, but I wouldn't drink it. Morning came, and with it a text from Thomas. "Coming home early. Flight lands at 11 o'clock. Can't wait to see you." Susan and I exchanged glances. "Change of plans," she said. "I'll hide now." By the time Thomas's key turned in the lock at noon, Susan was concealed in our rarely used formal dining room with a clear view of the kitchen. I sat at the kitchen island, reading a novel, looking like a wife innocently awaiting her husband's return. "Helen." Thomas called, setting down his bag in the entryway. "In the kitchen," I replied, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain he would hear it. He appeared in the doorway, smiling that familiar smile that now seemed like a stranger's. "Miss me?" "Of course." I stood to embrace him, fighting the urge to pull away. "How was the rest of the conference?" "Enlightening." He kissed my cheek. "Let me freshen up, then I'll tell you all about it over coffee." While Thomas showered, I texted Susan, "It's happening. Get ready." 20 minutes later, Thomas returned to the kitchen, looking refreshed in clean clothes, his hair still damp. "Sit," he insisted. "Let me take care of you. You're always taking care of everyone else." I obeyed, resuming my place at the island, watching as he carefully prepared coffee in our French press. His movements were practiced, precise, but then they always had been. Thomas was nothing if not meticulous. "I've been thinking," he said in a conversational way as he worked. "We should take a trip. Maybe the Amalfi Coast. You've always wanted to see Italy." "That sounds lovely," I said, my throat dry. He poured 2 cups of coffee, adding just the right amount of cream to mine, exactly as I liked it. But as he set the cup before me, I noticed something odd. A faint metallic smell beneath the rich coffee aroma. It was so subtle I might have missed it if I hadn't been so aware of every detail. "Drink up while it's hot," Thomas urged, taking a sip from his own cup. I raised mine to my lips, pretending to sip, but not allowing any liquid to enter my mouth. "Perfect," I murmured. Thomas watched me intently, an unfamiliar expression in his eyes. "Anticipation? Concern? Everything okay? You seem tense." "Just tired. Didn't sleep well with you gone." I set the cup down, sliding it slightly away from me. "Tell me about Boston. How was the conference?" "Fascinating." He launched into a detailed account of panels and speakers, all fiction I now knew. As he spoke, I noticed him glancing repeatedly at my coffee cup, noting how little I'd consumed. "You're not drinking your coffee?" he observed during a pause in his made-up story. "It's a bit hot still." "I'll get to it." I smiled, feeling my face stretch unnaturally with the effort. Thomas reached across the island, suddenly taking my hand in his. "Helen, are you sure you're feeling all right? You look pale." The concern in his voice seemed genuine, which only heightened the unreality of the moment. This man, who had shared my life for more than 4 decades, was sitting across from me, holding my hand while a poisoned coffee cooled between us. "Actually," I said slowly, "I am feeling a bit strange." Thomas's expression shifted subtly. "Relief? Maybe you should lie down. I can help you upstairs." "No," I said quickly. "I think I'll just sit here a moment." He frowned, checking his watch discreetly. "At least finish your coffee. The caffeine might help." The moment stretched between us, tight with unspoken tension. I knew I had to make a decision, confrontation or continuation of the game. In the end, instinct took over. "Actually," I said, "I think you should drink it." Thomas blinked. "What? My coffee? You drink it?" His expression darkened. "Don't be ridiculous. I have my own." "Then let's swap. I'm suddenly in the mood for a black." I pushed my cup toward him and reached for his. Thomas's hand shot out, catching my wrist with surprising strength. "Helen, what's going on?" The facade was crumbling. I looked into the eyes of the man I had loved for most of my life and saw a stranger looking back. "I think," I said carefully, "that you should explain what's in my coffee, Thomas." His grip on my wrist tightened painfully. "You're not making sense. Maybe you're having some kind of episode. I should call Dr. White." "I saw her yesterday. She says, I'm in perfect health." I met his gaze steadily. "Unlike you, I actually went where I said I was going." Thomas's face went blank, then rebuilt itself into a mask of confused concern. "Helen, you're not well. Let me help you to bed, and we can sort this out." "No." I pulled my wrist free with difficulty. "What I need is for you to explain the insurance policy, the secret bank account, the jewelry receipts, and the poison you just tried to give me." The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The mask dropped completely, revealing an expression I had never seen on my husband's face in 42 years of marriage. Cold, calculating, devoid of the love I had believed in for most of my life. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice flat. "Long enough." I moved backward, suddenly afraid in a way I had never been in my own home. Thomas's gaze flickered to my untouched coffee, then back to my face. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "Susan," I called, my voice steady despite the fear running through me. From the dining room doorway, Susan stepped into view, her phone held up, recording. "It's all on video, Thomas." The coffee, the conversation, everything. Thomas's face twisted with rage. He lunged across the island, sending coffee cups flying, his hands reaching for my throat. But Susan was faster. The heavy wooden cutting board connected with the back of Thomas's head, sending him crashing to the floor. I stumbled backward, gasping as Susan moved swiftly to my side. Are you okay? I nodded, unable to speak, staring at my husband's unconscious form on our kitchen floor. The same floor where we had danced on our 40th anniversary, where our grandchildren had taken their first steps. I've already called 911, Susan said, her arm around my shoulders. They're on their way. I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. He really was trying to kill me. Susan nodded grimly, and from the look on his face when you confronted him, he would have succeeded eventually. She gestured to the spilled coffee. We'll need to preserve that as evidence. As the wail of sirens approached in the distance, I looked around the kitchen that had been the heart of our family home for decades. The photos on the refrigerator, the silly magnets collected from family vacations, the handprint art from grandchildren. All that shared history built on what now appeared to be a foundation of lies. Or had it become a lie only recently? Had Thomas loved me once, truly, before something changed, before someone else became more important than 42 years of marriage? I didn't know. But as police officers entered our home and paramedics attended to the unconscious stranger on my kitchen floor, I realized I would have the time to find out. Thanks to a suspicious insurance policy, a metallic smell in my coffee, and the kind of intuition that only comes from a lifetime of paying attention to details, I would live to uncover the truth, whatever that truth might be. The police station smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. I sat in an interview room, a paper cup of water untouched before me. Susan was a reassuring presence at my side. Detective Roberts, a compact woman with clever eyes and graying hair, reviewed my statement for the third time. "Let me make sure I understand," she said, glancing up from her notes. "You discovered a life insurance policy taken out on you without your knowledge. You found evidence of unexplained financial transactions. You confirmed your husband was not where he claimed to be. And then, upon his return, you believe he attempted to poison you." "Yes," I said simply. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin and remote, as if belonging to someone else. "And you have documentation for the financial transactions and insurance policy?" "My attorney has copies of everything. I provided her with all the evidence as I discovered it." Detective Roberts nodded, making another note. "Smart. And the coffee." The officers took samples from both cups and the French press. Susan interjected. "I made sure they preserved everything according to protocol." Roberts's lip twitched, almost a smile. "Former law enforcement, detective's wife, 30 years. A look of understanding passed between them. "Well, Mrs. Clark, we've sent the coffee samples to the lab for analysis. Your husband is currently receiving medical attention, but once he's cleared, he'll be brought in for questioning. And then, that depends on what we find in the coffee and what he says." She closed her notebook. "For now, I'd advise you not to return home. Is there somewhere you can stay?" "She's coming with me," Susan said firmly. "My husband is a retired detective. She'll be safe with us." Roberts seemed satisfied with this arrangement. "We'll be in touch as soon as we have more information. In the meantime, if you think of anything else that might be relevant, call me directly." She slid a business card across the table. As we left the station, the reality of my situation began to sink in. My husband of 42 years was in custody, suspected of attempting to murder me. I was essentially homeless, the safety of my own home shattered by betrayal. And I still had no idea why. What had driven Thomas to such extremes after decades of what I had believed was a happy marriage? What happens now? I asked Susan as we drove to her home in the lengthening shadows of early evening. "Now," she said, her eyes on the road, "we find out why your husband tried to kill you." Susan and Henry's guest room became my sanctuary over the next few days. Henry, a big man with gentle eyes and a detective's natural suspicion, took it upon himself to get essential items from my home while police processed the scene. Place is crawling with technicians. He reported upon his return. "They're being thorough, which is good. Bagging everything, testing surfaces. If Thomas left any trace evidence of earlier attempts, they'll find it." The thought that there might have been earlier attempts, that the perfect coffee Thomas had been making for me each morning might have contained gradually increasing doses of poison, made me physically ill. On the third day after Thomas's arrest, Detective Roberts called with an update. The lab had confirmed the presence of a substance called thallium in my coffee cup, a tasteless, odorless poison that in small doses caused symptoms similar to a variety of illnesses, and in larger doses could be fatal, Roberts explained. It's sometimes called the poisoner's poison because it's hard to detect without specific testing, but in this case, he used too much. That's why you noticed the metallic smell. Is that why he scheduled his business trip around my doctor's appointment? I asked, the pieces falling into place. To make sure I wouldn't have blood work done that might detect it? Possibly. We're still investigating. Roberts paused. There's something else. We found evidence that your husband has been engaging in a relationship with another woman. Despite everything, despite the poisoned coffee and the attempted murder, despite 42 years of marriage ending in the most horrific betrayal imaginable, those words still had the power to wound me deeply. Who? I managed. A woman named Julia Miller. According to our investigation, they've been involved for approximately 6 months. The name meant nothing to me. Is she young? I asked, hating how vulnerable the question made me feel. No, Mrs. Clark. She's 61, a widow. She apparently believes your husband is also a widower. I sat heavily on Susan's guest bed. The phone clutched in my suddenly weak hand. He told her I was dead. It appears so. We'll be interviewing her today. She may have had no knowledge of his true circumstances or intentions. After ending the call, I sat motionless, trying to understand this new information. Thomas hadn't just betrayed me with another woman. He had erased me entirely, creating a fiction where I no longer existed. Perhaps in his mind, that made it easier to think about making the fiction a reality. Susan found me still sitting there an hour later, staring blankly at the wall. Helen, what did Roberts say? I told her the information in a robotic way, each word like glass in my mouth. When I finished, Susan sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. I'm so sorry. 42 years, I whispered. Was any of it real? Susan squeezed my hand. I don't know, but we're going to find out. The next day, Detective Roberts called again, this time requesting that I come to the station. We've interviewed Miss Miller and your husband. I think you should hear what we've learned. Henry drove us to the station, his natural protectiveness amplified by his law enforcement background. You don't have to do this today, he reminded me as we parked. It can wait until you're ready. But I was ready. The initial shock had given way to a cold, clear determination to understand exactly what had happened to my marriage, and why my husband of more than 4 decades had decided my death was better than a divorce. Detective Roberts met us in the lobby, her expression grave. Thank you for coming, Mrs. Clark. This way, please. She led us to a conference room, rather than the interview room, for my previous visit. A laptop was set up on the table along with a folder of documents. Before I show you these materials, I want to prepare you. Some of this will be difficult to hear, but based on our interviews with your husband and Miss Miller, as well as evidence recovered from your home and other locations, we've pieced together a timeline of events that led to the attempt on your life. I nodded, preparing myself. I understand. Roberts opened the folder. According to our investigation, your husband began his relationship with Julia Miller approximately 7 months ago after meeting her at a fundraising event for the hospital where his sister was treated for cancer. Miss Miller is on the hospital board. She slid a photograph across the table. A silver-haired woman with an elegant presence and expensively tailored clothes. Attractive, certainly, but not young, not a trophy girlfriend, but a peer. From the beginning, he presented himself as a widower. According to Miss Miller, he told her his wife, you, had died of cancer 3 years earlier. I stared at the photograph, trying to understand the level of deception required to maintain such a fiction. But we socialize regularly. We have friends, family. How could he possibly think no one would mention me? He was careful to keep Miss Miller separate from his existing social circles. The relationship was conducted primarily in Boston, where she has an apartment. Your husband would visit her there, claiming to be attending engineering conferences or consulting jobs. Those unexplained absences over the past months suddenly made sense. The late nights, the weekend golf tournaments that never seemed to result in trophies or stories. Meanwhile, our regular life continued. Dinners with friends, visits from our children and grandchildren, all the routines of a long-established marriage. As the relationship progressed, Roberts continued. Miss Miller began asking for a more permanent arrangement. She wanted him to move in with her, to stop living in what she saw as a shrine to his deceased wife. The bitter irony of it almost overwhelmed me. Exactly. At this point, approximately 3 months ago, we believe he began considering a permanent solution to his situation. The clinical way she phrased it, a permanent solution rather than murdering his wife, somehow made it more horrifying. The financial transactions you discovered were indeed connected to this plan. Roberts continued, spreading several documents on the table. The $50,000 withdrawn from your joint investment account was divided. Some went into the account you found, which appears to have been intended as a financial cushion during the transition period after your death. The jewelry purchases were gifts for Miss Miller. Each revelation was like another blow, but I remained outwardly composed. The decades of maintaining classroom discipline served me well in this moment of extreme emotional stress. And the life insurance policy? I asked, my voice remarkably steady. That's where it gets interesting. Roberts's expression shifted subtly. The policy was indeed taken out without your knowledge or consent, which is fraud. However, there's a detail you might not have noticed on the paperwork. She slid another document across the table, a copy of the insurance policy I discovered. She pointed to a section I hadn't focused on previously. The policy was started on March 10th, but the waiting period clause specifies that death benefits won't be paid for any death occurring less than 30 days after the policy date. Your husband's attempt to poison you occurred on April 8th. I stared at the document, understanding dawning slowly. 1 week too early. Exactly. If he had succeeded in killing you, the insurance company would not have paid the death benefit. The policy would have been essentially worthless. I looked up confused. But why? Why take out a policy and then act before it would pay? That's what confused us initially, Roberts admitted. It didn't make sense, unless the insurance policy wasn't the primary motivation. What do you mean? Based on our interviews and evidence, we believe your husband was under increasing pressure from Miss Miller to make their relationship public, to move in with her permanently. The existence of a living wife was an insurmountable obstacle to those plans. So, he decided to remove the obstacle, I said flatly. Yes, but he also needed financial security. The life insurance was meant to provide that, but he miscalculated the timing. According to his own statement, he believed the waiting period was 15 days, not 30. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. My husband of 42 years had tried to murder me for another woman, and he hadn't even bothered to read the fine print on the insurance policy that was supposed to fund his new life. What happens now? I asked. Your husband has been charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and several other related offenses. Given the evidence, his attorney will likely advise him to accept a plea deal, but that's still being negotiated. And Ms. Miller? At this point, we have no evidence she was aware of his plans or his true marital status. She appears to be as much a victim of his deception as you were, although in a different way. I nodded, trying to absorb everything. Is there anything else I should know? Roberts hesitated. There is one more thing. During our search of your home, we discovered a journal in your husband's golf bag. It contains detailed entries about his relationship with Miss Miller, his growing resentment toward you, and eventually his plans to eliminate you. She slid a plastic evidence bag across the table. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook I'd never seen before. This is a copy, she explained. The original is in evidence, but we thought you should see it. It might help you understand if understanding is even possible in a situation like this. I stared at the journal, uncertain if I wanted to read the private thoughts of a man who had shared my bed, my home, my life for more than 4 decades, only to decide that killing me was better than the social and financial complications of divorce. Thank you, I said, finally taking the bagged journal. I'll consider it. As I stood to leave, Roberts gave me a searching look. Mrs. Clark, I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've seen all kinds of betrayal. But what your husband did, the calculation, the deception maintained over months while living as your spouse, it's extraordinary. I want you to know that none of this reflects on you. Some people simply hide their true nature very, very well. Her words were meant to be comforting, I knew, but they only underscored the devastating reality I was facing. The man I had loved and trusted for most of my life had never truly existed. Susan and Henry's guest room became my refuge as spring came outside the windows. I spent days there, only coming out for meals, processing the destruction of my marriage and the near destruction of my life. The journal remained unopened on the nightstand. I wasn't ready to read Thomas's words, to see our marriage through the twisted lens of his growing contempt. Not yet. Instead, I focused on practical matters. My attorney helped me get court orders, freezing our joint assets and preventing Thomas from making any financial decisions while awaiting trial. I spoke with our children, a devastating conversation where I had to explain that their father had been charged with attempting to murder me. Their shock and grief mirrored my own, a shared pain that would take years to process. I just can't believe it, Lisa said, her voice breaking over the phone. Our dad, tried to. I can't even say it. I know, I soothed, my mothering instincts overriding my own pain. I can hardly believe it myself, but why? After all these years, why not just ask for a divorce? It was the question everyone asked, the one I asked myself continuously. Why choose murder over divorce? The financial cost would have been similar. The emotional cost for our family would have been significant, but something we could live through. What could possibly make death seem like the better option? 2 weeks after Thomas's arrest, I finally picked up the journal. The first entry was dated 6 months ago, around the time he met Julia Miller at the hospital fundraiser. His handwriting, so familiar from decades of birthday cards and grocery lists, filled the pages with a story I barely recognized. Met an extraordinary woman tonight, Julia Miller. Elegant, intelligent, financially independent, sits on the hospital board. Felt an immediate connection, unlike anything I've experienced in decades. I forced myself to continue reading, each page revealing more of my husband's double life and his growing resentment toward me and our marriage. Told Julia my wife died 3 years ago, cancer. The lie came easily, which should disturb me more than it does, but it feels like a different life, one where possibilities still exist. Helen, and I have been going through the motions for years. She doesn't see it or chooses not to. Either way, when I'm with Julia, I feel alive again. As the entries progressed, his reasons became more detailed, his attitude toward me more scornful. Helen asked about the conference in Philadelphia today. Another lie. Spent the weekend with Julia in her Boston apartment instead. The deception is becoming second nature. Helen suspects nothing. She's too busy with her book club and grandchildren to notice my absence. Sometimes I wonder if she'd notice if I disappeared entirely. The cruelty was breathtaking. This man had shared my bed, my meals, my life, while secretly hating my contentment with our retirement years, our grandchildren, our quiet routines. Julia wants me to move in with her permanently. Keeps asking why I'm still living in that museum to your dead wife. The irony isn't lost on me. My dead wife is very much alive, cooking dinner and asking about my day. If only she knew. Then 3 months ago, the entries took a darker turn. Looked into divorce today. The financial implications are staggering. Half of everything we've built over 42 years would go to Helen. My pension split. The house sold. At my age, starting over with those financial problems is unthinkable. There has to be another way. The other way began to take shape in later entries. A plan so cold-blooded, it was difficult to understand. It had been thought of by someone I had loved and trusted completely. Research life insurance policies today. If Helen were to die unexpectedly, the financial picture would be entirely different. As her husband, I'd inherit everything plus the insurance payout. A clean break, a fresh start with Julia. Is it wrong that this solution feels increasingly logical? Page after page detailed his evolving plan. The research into poisons, the consultations with the attorney about inheritance laws, the creation of a financial cushion, the careful timing of my accidental death to avoid suspicion. Thallium seems ideal. Gradual poisoning over weeks would appear as a natural illness. By the time anyone might think to test for it, specifically, cremation would get rid of the evidence. Helen prefers her coffee with cream, perfect for masking any subtle taste. We'll begin with minute doses next week. The final entry, dated the day before his return from the made-up Boston conference, was perhaps the most chilling. Everything in place, insurance policy in effect, final dose ready. Helen's doctor appointment perfectly timed. She'll report symptoms that sound like early heart problems, but no blood tests that might raise questions. Within days, it will be over. A grieving widower free to begin again, financially secure. Julia already discussing travel plans for summer. Just one final dissection, one last act, and this double life ends. Helen would never understand what she had become, an obstacle to happiness, a financial burden, a reminder of decades of quiet desperation. Better this way, painless for her, freedom for me. I closed the journal, my hands shaking. The man who had written these words, this calculating, remorseless stranger, had kissed me goodbye each morning, had attended our grandchildren's birthday parties, had brought me tea when I had a cold just a month earlier. Had it all been a performance? Had 42 years of marriage been nothing but an elaborate lie culminating in this final monstrous betrayal? I didn't sleep that night. The journal's revelations played endlessly through my mind. By morning, I had reached a decision. I would not allow Thomas's actions to destroy me, not physically through poison, and not emotionally through the devastation of betrayal. I called Detective Roberts. "I'd like to speak with Julia Miller," I said when she answered. There was a pause on the line. "Mrs. Clark, I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Please, I need to understand all of it, and I think she might need to understand, too." After some thought, Roberts agreed to arrange a meeting on neutral ground, her office at the police station, with certain conditions. Julia Miller had agreed, apparently as desperate for answers as I was. 2 days later, I sat in a small conference room waiting. When the door opened, I found myself face to face with the woman my husband had been willing to kill for. Julia Miller was striking in person, tall and thin, with expertly styled silver hair, and the kind of face that ages beautifully. She wore a simple but clearly expensive navy dress, minimal jewelry, and an expression of complete devastation. "Mrs. Clark," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am." "Please sit," I said, pointing to the chair across from me. "And it's Helen." She sank into the chair, her calm clearly fragile. "I want you to know I had no idea Thomas was married. None. He told me his wife, you, had died of cancer 3 years ago. He described the treatments, the hospice care, everything in such detail." Her voice broke. I believed every word. I nodded, studying her closely. Detective Roberts had found no evidence linking Julia to Thomas's plans, and seeing her now, I believed she had been as deceived as I had been. Perhaps more so, since her entire relationship had been built on a fundamental lie. "I didn't come here to blame you," I said carefully. "I came because I need to understand what happened to my marriage, and I thought perhaps you might need answers, too." Julia's eyes filled with tears. "How could he do this to you, to me, to your family? What kind of person plans something like this?" "That's what I'm trying to understand. The man described in his journal. The man you knew bears no resemblance to the husband I thought I had for 42 years. Journal." Julia looked confused. I hesitated, then pushed the evidence bag containing Thomas's journal across the table. "The police found this. It details everything. His relationship with you, his growing resentment toward me, and eventually his plan to murder me rather than face divorce." Julia stared at the journal as if it were a poisonous snake, making no move to touch it. "I don't know if I can bear to read it. I understand. I almost couldn't myself. But it answered questions I needed answered. Was any of it real? What we had?" The vulnerability in her question mirrored my own internal struggle. "I don't know. I've been asking myself the same thing about 42 years of marriage. I met her eyes directly. What did he tell you about me? About his deceased wife? Julia looked away, clearly uncomfortable. He said you were a high school English teacher, that you loved gardening and classic films, that your marriage had been happy but quiet routine. She hesitated. He said by the end you'd become, this sounds terrible, rather boring, set in your ways, uninterested in travel or new experiences. The careless cruelty of it stung. I see. He showed me pictures of your garden, said you'd created it together, and maintaining it was his way of honoring your memory. She gave a bitter laugh. God, how easily I believed it all. The grieving widower tending his dead wife's flowers. Finally ready to love again. It was like something from a novel or a bad film, I said, surprising myself with a touch of dark humor. Julia looked startled, then gave a small, sad smile. Yes, a very bad film. We sat in silence for a moment, two women united by the devastating actions of a man we had both loved in our different ways. Did he ever mention our children? I asked finally. Our grandchildren? Julia nodded. He spoke of them often. Actually, Lisa and Michael, the grandchildren, Rose, Jack, and Lily. He seemed genuinely proud. Showed me pictures. She paused. That makes it worse somehow, doesn't it? That he could love them, be proud of them, while planning to destroy their family completely. I finished. Yes, it does. I don't understand it. Julia said, genuine pain in her voice. If he wanted to be with me, why not simply ask for a divorce? I have my own money. He wouldn't have needed to. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. According to his journal, he couldn't bear the financial implications. The division of assets, splitting the pension, selling the house. At our age, starting over with smaller resources. I spread my hands. Apparently, murdering me seemed more practical. The blunt statement hung in the air between us. I feel responsible, Julia said after a moment. If I hadn't pursued him, if I hadn't pressed for a more permanent arrangement. No, I said firmly. Whatever my husband became, whatever dark feelings drove him to this, they were not your creation. He chose deception at every turn, with you, with me, with everyone. Those choices were his alone. We talked for nearly 2 hours, piecing together the fragments of our relationships with Thomas, trying to construct a coherent story from the wreckage of his deceptions. By the time we parted, something like understanding had formed between us. Not friendship, certainly, but a mutual recognition of shared victimhood, and the long road to recovery ahead. What will you do now? Julia asked as we prepared to leave. Rebuild, I said simply. My life, my sense of security, my relationships with my children and grandchildren. Thomas took many things from me, but he doesn't get to take my future. Julia nodded, a new resolve in her expression. No, he doesn't get to take that from either of us. As we walked out of the police station into the bright spring afternoon, I felt a weight lifting. Not the entire burden of betrayal and near death, but enough to allow me to see a path forward. The man I had loved for most of my life had tried to kill me. That reality would never change, never diminish in its horror. But I had survived, not by chance or luck, but through my own instincts, my own actions. I had recognized the danger, gathered evidence, created a plan, and ultimately saved my own life by refusing to drink from the poisoned cup. That knowledge, terrible as the circumstances were, gave me strength. Thomas had failed, and I would not. Summer arrived with a blaze of heat and humidity, unusual for early June. I had moved from Susan and Henry's guest room to a small apartment near the community college, where I taught for 30 years before retirement. The familiar surroundings provided comfort as I navigated the complex process of disentangling my life from Thomas's, legally, financially, and emotionally. The district attorney had offered Thomas a plea deal, 25 years for attempted murder with additional sentences for fraud and other charges. Given the overwhelming evidence, including his own journal and the poisoned coffee, his court-appointed attorney had strongly advised him to accept. But Thomas, in what I now recognized as characteristic arrogance, had refused. He wanted a trial, apparently believing he could somehow persuade a jury of reasonable doubt despite the mountain of evidence against him. The trial was scheduled for September. In the meantime, I focused on rebuilding, meeting regularly with my attorney, my financial advisor, and a therapist specializing in trauma and betrayal. My children visited often, their initial shock and disbelief gradually giving way to a protective anger that was both touching and occasionally overwhelming. "Mom, you should move to Portland," Lisa suggested during one visit. "Be near us, near Rose. We have that mother-in-law suite that's just sitting empty." Or Boston, Michael countered during his turn. "The boys would love having Grandma close by." I appreciated their concern, but knew I needed to make my own decisions, create my own path forward. "I'm not ready to leave yet," I told them gently. "This is still my community, my support system, but I promise to consider all options once the trial is over." The trial, it was something I was both dreading and looking forward to. I would have to testify, to face Thomas across a courtroom, to speak aloud the details of his betrayal and my narrow escape from his murderous plan. A week before the trial was set to begin, Detective Roberts called with unexpected news. "Mrs. Clark, Thomas has changed his mind. He's accepting the plea deal." I sat heavily on my small apartment sofa. Why the sudden change? His attorney received the complete evidence package, including testimony from the lab technicians about the concentration of thallium in your coffee. Apparently, seeing the scientific proof in black and white finally convinced him that his defense had no chance of success. Relief flooded through me. No trial, no public recounting of the most painful chapter of my life. No facing Thomas across a courtroom. Seeing the face I had loved for decades, now consumed with resentment and calculation. What happens now? I asked. "He'll appear before the judge next week for a formal plea and sentencing. You have the right to make a victim impact statement, if you wish." Did I wish to speak? To give voice to the devastation Thomas had caused, the trust he had shattered, the life he had nearly taken? I wasn't sure. "I'll think about it," I said, but as the date approached, I knew with increasing certainty that I needed to speak, not for Thomas's benefit, but for my own. I needed to stand in that courtroom, look my would-be murderer in the eye, and reclaim my story from the distortions of his journal. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, warm despite the air conditioning struggling against the late summer heat. I sat in the front row, Susan beside me, my children protecting me like guards. Thomas sat at the defense table, his shoulders bent in a way I'd never seen before, defeated, diminished. When he entered his guilty plea, his voice was barely audible. The judge asked him to speak up to confirm that he understood the charges and the sentence he was accepting. Thomas complied, his gaze fixed on the table before him, never once looking in my direction. Then it was my turn. I approached the podium, my prepared statement in hand. But as I faced the court, I set the paper aside. What I needed to say couldn't be scripted. "My name is Helen Clark," I began, my voice steady. "For 42 years, I believed I was married to a man who loved me, who respected me, who would protect me from harm, not become the source of it." Now, Thomas looked up, his expression unreadable. The man sitting at that table planned my death in careful detail. He researched poisons, created fake excuses, calculated financial benefits, all while sharing meals with me, sleeping beside me, participating in family gatherings. He did this not in a moment of anger or temporary insanity, but through months of sustained, deliberate planning. I paused, gathering strength for what came next. In his journal, my husband described me as an obstacle to his happiness, a financial burden, a reminder of what he called decades of quiet desperation. He decided that killing me was more convenient than divorcing me, more practical than having an honest conversation about the state of our marriage. Thomas's gaze dropped again, his shoulders hunching slightly. I want the court to understand the magnitude of this betrayal. This was not a crime of opportunity or impulse. This was calculated, researched, practiced through smaller doses given over weeks. This was a man who decided after 42 years of marriage that his wife's life had no value beyond its inconvenience to his future plans. My voice remained strong, fueled by a righteous anger that had been building since I first discovered the insurance policy. I read his journal, every page, every detailed plan for my death, every scornful dismissal of our shared life. And I want him to know something. I looked directly at Thomas, waiting until he reluctantly raised his eyes to meet mine. You failed, not just in your attempt to kill me, but in your understanding of who I am. You wrote that I was unobservant, stuck in my ways, easily deceived. You were wrong. I noticed the insurance policy. I questioned your absences. I smelled the metallic odor in the coffee you so carefully prepared. I saved my own life through the very qualities you dismissed. Thomas's face had gone pale, his eyes locked with mine, now, in what appeared to be genuine shock. The sentence you're receiving today is fair, but no prison term can truly account for the life you stole from me. Not through death, but through the destruction of 42 years of memories now forever stained by the knowledge of who you really are. I took a deep breath, nearing the conclusion of what I needed to say. Despite everything, I stand here today not as a victim, but as a survivor. You didn't succeed in killing me, and you won't succeed in destroying my capacity for joy, for trust, for a meaningful future. That's the final failure in your careful plan. I will rebuild. I will thrive. I will find happiness again. With that, I returned to my seat, my legs shaking but my spirit unbroken. The judge thanked me for my statement, then proceeded with formal sentencing. 25 years as per the agreement, with no possibility of getting out early for at least 20. As Thomas was led away in handcuffs, he turned briefly in my direction. For a moment, I saw something in his expression that might have been regret, or perhaps just the final realization that he had underestimated me completely. Either way, it was the last time I would see the man I had married, the man who had shared my life, the man who had meticulously planned my death. The door closed behind him, and a chapter of my life, the longest, most significant chapter, closed with it. Outside the courthouse, surrounded by my children, Susan and Henry, and a few close friends who had come to support me, I lifted my face to the late summer sun. "Mom, are you okay?" Lisa asked, her arm around my shoulders. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." And for the first time since discovering that insurance policy in a drawer 4 months earlier, I truly believed it. The coastline of southern Maine stretched before me, rugged and beautiful in the crisp autumn light. I sat on the small deck of my rented cottage, a steaming mug of tea prepared by my own hands, warming my palms against the October chill. In the years since Thomas's sentencing, I had remade my life piece by piece. The legal separation of our assets had been complex, but ultimately fair, leaving me financially secure, if not wealthy. I had sold our family home, unable to imagine living there again, and used part of the money to purchase a small apartment in a community for active seniors. The rest I had set aside for travel, for experiences long put off, for the education funds of my grandchildren. My relationship with Julia Miller had evolved in unexpected ways. Initially linked only by our shared betrayal, we had developed a careful friendship built on mutual respect and understanding. She had moved to California to be near her own daughter and grandchildren, but we spoke monthly, comparing notes on our healing journeys. The psychological aftermath of Thomas's betrayal had been perhaps the most challenging aspect of recovery, learning to trust again, not just potential romantic partners, but my own judgment, was a slow, difficult process. My therapist compared it to fixing a broken limb, gradual strengthening, occasional setbacks, persistent effort. But I had made progress, significant progress. I had opened myself to new friendships, new experiences, new ideas of what my remaining years might hold, including perhaps new love. As if summoned by the thought, William appeared in the doorway behind me. "Tea getting cold?" he asked, his voice carrying the slight accent of his native Scotland. "Just right," I replied, smiling as he settled into the chair beside mine. William Scott had entered my life 6 months earlier, a retired history professor and widower who shared my love of literature and hiking. Our relationship had developed slowly, both of us carrying the emotional scars of our past. His from grief, mine from betrayal. "A penny for your thoughts," he said, his hand covering mine on the deck railing. Just reflecting. It's been a year today since the sentencing. William nodded, understanding without the need for more words. I had told him everything early in our friendship, wanting complete honesty about the trauma that had shaped my recent life. And how do you feel about that milestone? I considered the question carefully. Lighter, I said finally, like I've set down a heavy burden I didn't realize I was still carrying. Good. He squeezed my hand gently. You deserve that lightness, Helen. After everything, you deserve every moment of joy you can find. We sat in comfortable silence, watching seagulls fly against the darkening sky. In the distance, a lighthouse beam began its rhythmic sweep, a beacon of warning and guidance, both. My phone chimed softly, a text from Lisa with a new photo of Rose, now 4 and beaming with a missing front tooth. I showed it to William, who smiled warmly. You'll be flying out to see them next week? Yes, Thursday through Monday. Rose has a dance recital she's very excited about. Another comfortable silence fell between us. This was one of the things I appreciated most about William, his ease with quiet moments, his lack of need to fill every space with words. I've been thinking, he said finally, about taking a trip this winter, somewhere warm. The Bahamas perhaps, or the southern coast of Spain. He turned to face me directly. Would you consider joining me? The invitation was carefully phrased, respectful of my independence, my potential hesitations, my still healing heart. But there was hope in his eyes and something more. A year ago, such an invitation would have terrified me. The idea of trusting another man, of making myself vulnerable again, would have seemed impossible. But now, watching the lighthouse beam make its steady circuit, I found myself considering possibilities rather than dangers. I think, I said slowly, that Spain sounds wonderful in winter. All that sunshine, all that history. William's smile was like the lighthouse beam, steady, illuminating, trustworthy. Excellent. We'll start planning when you return from Portland. As dusk deepened into early evening, we retreated inside to prepare dinner together. A simple meal of fish soup and crusty bread. The small cottage kitchen was warm and fragrant with herbs and spices. The routine of cooking alongside someone was both new and comforting. Later, sharing wine by the small fireplace, I found myself thinking about the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the discovery of betrayal to the narrowly avoided poisoning, from the devastating revelations of the trial to the slow, painful process of rebuilding, each step had led me here, to this moment of quiet contentment in a coastal cottage with a man who asked for nothing but my company. Thomas had failed in every aspect of his plan. He had not taken my life. He had not destroyed my capacity for joy. He had not even succeeded in erasing the possibility of love from my future. His final gift to me, ironically, had been freedom. Freedom from a marriage that had apparently been hollow for years. Freedom to discover my own strength. Freedom to reimagine my life on my own terms. More wine. William offered, interrupting my thoughts. I smiled, extending my glass. Yes, please. As he poured, I made a silent toast to myself, to the woman who had noticed an insurance policy hidden in a drawer, who had smelled something metallic in her coffee, who had trusted her instincts and saved her own life,